Welcome to STEAM Pod, where I have conversations with women in STEAM to learn a little bit about what they do and who they are. I'm your host, Michelle Ong. My guest today is Dr. Kit Prendergast. Kit is a native bee scientist and science communicator who's passionate about sharing that we can all learn more about our indigenous bees and not just their popular honeybee cousins, so that we can make a difference to their conservation. Join us as we talk about Australian native bees, bee conservation, and biological taxonomy. Welcome, Kit. Thank you so much for joining me today on STEAM Pod. It's wonderful to speak to you today all about bees and everything that you're working on.
Yeah, it's great to be chatting and buzzing about bees with you. Thanks.
Oh, that's cool. I love how into the whole, like, not just the topic, but just the entire aesthetic. It's fantastic. So, what drew you to zoology to begin with?
So I absolutely adore animals, and I have my whole entire life. When I was in year 7, we you give each other nicknames, and I was Animal Freak. Yeah, I was Animal Freak, and I've just had this great passion for animals. My parents have had to put up a lot. I guess I was a good teenager in the way I never drank, I never did drugs, all that sort of stuff. I'd sneak pet mice into my bedroom, pet axolotls, birds, and bring home injured baby parrots and all that sort of. So I was that weird wild child. I was climbing trees and really into nature, and yeah, just loved animals. And I also love science, and I have this huge curiosity, and I think that passion to explore the world and discover more about other species and how they think and how they behave, as well as how I can make a difference to them, and help people understand them and also conserve them. That's how I got into zoology, I guess, combining those passions. I mean, I also did an arts degree, so I was sort of tossing up
Oh,
between following a science path versus following an arts path, in particular cultural studies. And
nice.
going through university, I realized that I definitely preferred science in terms of a career path. So
That's very cool.
that's how I got into
Nice.
biology.
That is very cool. So, what sort of cultural studies were you interested in?
So I did a degree in English and cultural studies, and I studied everything from pop culture to myth history to medievalism. Um, as I've got dogs with me, so
Yep. All good.
they'll be, you know, chiming in the background. So medievalism, I studied romance, and also philosophy. So a huge range. Then I started running out of units that I was interested in. So I started studying English, no, Australian canonical literature. Um, yeah, so, a whole
Nice.
range of things. Yeah.
Massively diverse. That's very cool. It's awesome. So, how, given your incredible love of all animals, how did you find yourself down the bee path?
Yeah, so it was very, I guess, unplanned. Like you hear often people that when they become, specialized on a particular animal, they're like, "Oh, I love bees since I was a little kid," and I never I liked bees, but I never really, because I think like most people, um, they I didn't realize that there were really more bees than honeybees. I knew there were bumblebees, but not in Australia.
Yeah.
And so I developed my passion for bees quite late in life. um, and so I'd I was a huge horse lover when I was growing up, and I still do love
Yep.
horses. And so I did my honors on horses, and then after I finished honors, I knew I wanted to continue my studies further, and get to have doctor in front of my name. However, working with horses, it's very challenging in a scientific setting. So I started thinking about other species I could research and other research projects. So when you're designing a PhD study, it's better to, rather than say, I want to work on this particular animal, to say, here's a problem, or here's something that's unsolved, and then use a particular species to solve that question. And so I started thinking about all these types of projects, and I went to a talk on like on, not really on native bees, but sort of this man was a photographer, and I went to this talk and he was showing his photos of native bees, and I was like, these are really, really cool. And I didn't even realize that there were so many native bees, and they'd be like fascinating to study and see how many there are, especially in southwest Western Australia, because this is a biodiversity hotspot.
Yeah,
Having a very large number of plant species that are found nowhere else in the world, in particular wildflowers. Lots of the wildflowers probably need bees, and here in Perth, well, I'm now in Bunbury, but in Perth and this region anyway, the southwest WA, it's urbanized. This presents challenges probably to native bees, through destruction of habitat, but also people plant gardens. How does this impact the native bees? And so that's how it developed, and how I got into bees. And then now I'm like, now I'm for being like, the bee girl that may
bee
stay
person.
it. So yeah, they're now very much part of my life and my persona. So yeah.
That is so cool. So, with the native bee research, I mean, is there like how much research is being done in the area that you're doing in terms of the way that, I guess, the competition between native bees and the introduced species?
Yeah, I feel like I got into this at a really like critical time. So while I was doing my studies, I've been finding lots of people are starting to look at sort of the same research questions throughout the world. Um, and yeah, it's quite coincidental, maybe, or maybe like, you know, I guess using my cultural studies thing, there's like been a shift, I guess, in research focus, and more people are realizing that honeybees are an introduced species, and contrary to what the media is portraying, they're actually not endangered or threatened. And so looking at how an introduced abundant species might be impacting wildlife. So I guess especially in Australia, there's been a lot of focus on introduced species and their impacts on wildlife in terms of mammals, so cats and
Yeah,
foxes and their impact on marsupials. And the honeybee is an interesting one because it is an introduced species, but it's also a domesticated species and of economic importance. And so that creates a little bit of a conflict as well.
yeah,
So all these sort of questions have been, started to be researched, and studies across the world are finding that honeybees aren't particularly benign when it comes to their impact on native bees. And it's not in every case that they're going to outcompete native bees, but there is increasing accumulating evidence that they can have negative impacts. So it's something we need to be aware of.
yeah. And it's so interesting because, commonly you hear about all the save the bees stuff. We need to look after bees. We need to, do the seed bombs and plant diverse, gardens for urbanized bees. But with the work that you're doing, like you're saying that a lot of bees do behave differently depending on what species they are, which makes sense. But how does all of this, I guess, common, not really misconception, but this idea of how we're supposed to save bees impact the different species? So are they just getting us to save the honeybees, or are they getting us to save the bees in general? Like how much of this advice they give us really helps, I guess, the overall bee populations?
Yeah, so lots of it actually doesn't help or can be even counteractive to helping the bees that need helping, so that, the wild native bees. So I guess the first, sort of one about like, you should have honeybees in your backyard. That's definitely not helping the wild bees, because the increasing densities of honeybees um, can outcompete the native bees. And then some of the plants that are, promoted to help bees actually don't help the native bees. So exotic plants, many of our native bees are quite specialized. So if you're planting exotic plants that honeybees like, things like poppies or lavender or borage, all those are introduced species in Australia, and if they get out into the wild, they could become invasive species. But even in gardens, they're going to be promoting the honeybees over the native bees, because many of our native bees won't forage on these introduced plants. So even if you have, and this is a really surprising finding from my research, if you have a garden that has lots and lots of different plant species, usually it's sort of like a mantra: plant the bees and the bees will come, and more species means more, biodiversity. It's actually not the case.
Yeah.
You've got a garden full of exotic plant species. So really the best thing is to have, big proportions of native plants in your garden. And then, other things like that the native bees need that actually don't, have nothing to do with honeybees, you know, patches of bare soil for the ground nesting bees, um, trees with tiny little holes in them for the cavity nesting bees. And, that's not part of the honey, save the honeybee recommendations. And
Yeah.
it's, yeah, very different way of helping the native bees and the honeybees. And as I said, helping honeybees just doesn't help the native bees. If you're increasing densities of honeybees, you're just increasing the competitive pressure.
Yeah. So when I was crash coursing bees in preparation for our talk, like all of the stuff that came up about, the way that, people were saying, we need to, host local hives and add bee hotels to your homes. All of that starts to sound like contradictory or not quite mutually exclusive, but people just lump it all into this one big space. And it's hard to kind of see what we can do to try and help and how we can focus kind of those efforts, especially when we're living in urban areas. So, in urban environments, when they're telling us, we need to do these things, what's the best approach for us to take if we do want to try and look into how we can help bees?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways you can help the native bees. Um, and they sort of start from very local to more global action. So at your very local level, as in where you live, um, keeping patches of bare soil, creating bee hotels that are based on scientific evidence. So the ones that Bunnings sell, the brand Mr. Fothergill's, aren't very good. But making your own bee hotels, they can be good for the cavity nesting bees. Planting high proportions of native flowers, retaining, trees, the native trees on your verges, especially the flowering ones like eucalyptus and callistemon are really good. And then you expand out a bit, critical thing I found is protecting patches of bushland around the suburbs. So not allowing bushland to be cleared for road development or housing development. Um, and then, further afield, promoting wildlife friendly farming. So retaining lots of native vegetation and trees, and, wildflower strips in agricultural areas. And then like at the big global level, one of the biggest threats to native bees is like habitat loss and climate change as a whole. And so to address probably these the biggest threats to native bees, you can still do something by modifying your diet. So animal agriculture results in clearing of native vegetation and compacts the soil. Lots of the crops that livestock eat are not good for pollinators. So, grasses, they don't offer nectar and pollen. And then livestock contribute a lot to climate change as well. So by eliminating or reducing meat in your diet, you can make a huge impact in that way.
It's, basically the bees are just part of a smaller, they're part of a bigger issue.
Yes.
Yeah. So with the native bees that we have around you, the kind of advice that you're giving us, is that applicable irrespective of where we are in terms of the way that we can affect our immediate environment? Or is it something that we need to look into the types of native species that we've got around before we can kind of make those sorts of choices?
Yeah, so the best plants for native bees in Australia will be very different from the best plants for native bees in France or Brazil.
Yeah.
Um, but when it comes to in Australia, the this what's important is the genus of plants. So you don't really
Hmm.
need to be super specific to the plants that are endemic to your very, very local area.
Yeah.
This would be a an evolutionary dead end if things were so specialized that it was a single plant in a single place. And plants and animals have migrated around naturally, colonize new areas. So the important thing is the genus. So
Yeah.
most eucalyptus are good for native bees, irrespective of where you are in Australia. And even some that genera, for example, Angophora, that is a genus that doesn't occur in Western Australia, but it's been planted here, and the native bees will forage on that. So looking at the native plants and the genus, and seeing what species you can get that are available to you.
That's pretty cool. Okay. And one thing I did wonder as well with I'm pretty sure you're aware of Postcode Honey, that big thing in WA where, they're keen on getting, um, I guess, local honey from each suburb in the state made available. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with stuff like that, I'm assuming most of them are working with the introduced honeybees. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be so most of our native bees don't make honey. It's
Hmm.
only eusocial colonial bees that make honey. We have 11 of these. These are in the tribe Meliponene, but they don't occur in southwest Western Australia. They occur up north in Western Australia and then into the Northern Territory and then down the east coast down to Sydney. So, and they only make a small amount of honey. So this postcode honey would be honeybee honey.
Yeah.
I guess it's not a bad thing, because if you're getting things locally, and this applies to any food, it means there's
Yeah.
less transport, so less carbon emissions. So it's it's not a bad thing, but yeah, it's just the honeybees.
It's mainly about the introduced bees. Yeah, it's interesting. Ah, because I did hear that there were like small batch hives that were doing the native bee honey, and it was apparently um, not classified as honey because of its water content.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
the Meliponene honey. You can't get it here in southwest Western Australia because we've got very
yeah,
strict honey importation laws.
yeah,
So it's very weird because um, it's it's definitely honey. It's produced by bees. The same process. It's just a different species.
yeah,
Their honey does have a higher water content, and so the standards for what honey is, and I guess that it's important to have standards, especially recently, because honey is a very prized and has been throughout history, but a very prized.
Yeah.
And so recently there's been like fraud where people have been making like
Fraudulent honey.
syrup and selling it as honey, where it's clearly it doesn't have many of the biological properties that can only be possessed by honey through the process of the bees
Yeah.
making it. So yeah, there's standards for what honey is, but it's based on the honeybee honey, and the meliponene honey has a high water content, and that's just how they make it. And yeah, so it's
That's cool.
not currently classified as honey, but there is discussions to have a specific classification for this other honey.
That's kind of cool. Lots of details that you don't really think about when you look at honey on the shelf. That's cool. So, what got you into your scicomm activities and, getting completely into the bee aesthetic and making that a whole thing? That is so cool.
I I love performing, and so I really like that I've been able to take my science and my bees, and I'm very passionate about them. And the good thing about, I guess, bees is many people are interested in them, and they're just not really aware about the native bees. So in part, it was sort of, I guess, finding something that I realized people could get into, but also like I'm this huge like science Nazi, and like I hate people like getting science wrong. I hate misinformation. I hate pseudoscience, and so I realized that there was like so much misinformation out there about helping bees and about bees in general, their biology. And there is so much pseudoscience when it comes to bees. So I was like, I need to change this. So part of it was like, this is really cool. I can get people into bees, and part of it was like, oh my god, I hate like all this misinformation. I need to do something about it. So yeah.
That is absolutely cool. So, what sort of activities are you doing at the moment?
So I visit schools a lot, and that's my favorite thing because kids, you never know what questions they're going to ask, and they're just like this. They're so keen to learn and find information, and also I guess they also get excited that I guess I am who I am. Like I'm not the image of a scientist that I guess most of them expect. Um, and I've even had some of them ask me like, "Oh, are you like you still in high school or something?" I'm like, um, but just yeah, like showing them that a scientist doesn't have to be this old guy in a cardigan. Like I'm nothing against old guys in cardigans, but like um yeah, that they anyone can be a scientist, and that you don't have to be this like super strict, dry, boring person. Like you can go out there, you can wear colorful clothes, you can like just be yourself, you can do cartwheels, um that sort of thing. And
Yeah,
so
makes
I
science fun.
do that with kids. So I often get asked to talk at like gardening groups or in like local councils, and so that's my other side of the scientific outreach. And then I also very early on in my PhD created a Facebook group called Bees in the Burbs, and that's been going on since then, since mid 2016. So I guess an online social media presence and outreach.
That's awesome. So, just helping people answer questions about, bees in their local environment and what they can do. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. So, now that you've finished your PhD, congratulations.
Thank
What are
you.
you working on now?
Oh, so many things. So, firstly, even though the PhD is finished, there's I did so much research and so much data collection that only part of it even made it into my thesis. So I've got like 10 half-finished papers still
Wow.
from my thesis that I'm gradually working on. And then I'm working on a couple of reviews, and they are always really challenging because they just take so long. And it's like if they're published, it's great because they get cited a lot, they get read a lot. Unlike, I guess data papers, synthesizing the research and identifying gaps in knowledge is always really useful. But they just, yeah, a lot of trawling through the literature. And then I'm doing surveys of the Jarrah Forest for Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, which is lovely because a beautiful, beautiful place to survey. And
Yeah.
so been up sort of near Broome, surveying traditional landowners' country, which is really amazing and a great privilege. Then I also am starting to do some work on bee behaviour and cognition in urban areas as
Cognition.
well as wilder areas. So how they, I guess, how fast they learn, and there's been a lot of research on honeybee learning, and like honeybees are great to work with because they're actually really, um, you know, they can be manipulated quite well. It's much harder to work with the wild bees, and so it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. But yeah, it's early days. I haven't. We've just been planning the studies so far.
That's very cool.
Yeah, so I'm doing a lot.
Yeah, quite a bit. That's awesome. So, yeah, bee cognition. That sounds like such a cool area to work with. Is there any particular focus that you have in terms of the way they learn?
So learning different colors and their I guess how fast they can learn particular stimuli and how this relates to urbanization. So there's been quite a body of literature on other animals and how urbanization affects their cognition, and many species urban environments are a lot more challenging, so they're finding that animals are smarter in urban
Yeah,
environments. So it's stuff like raccoons and cockatoos and species like that, and so we want to see if that is also the case in bees.
that's very, very cool. That'd be very interesting to see. And I guess it will also kind of lead into the way they end up interacting with the native species as well because of the way that they learn.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. Awesome. So, in your research with the native bees, what are some of the most interesting things that you learned?
In terms of interesting, as in things I didn't expect, or like
Yeah.
new discoveries. One of them was that, that how I said that there's sort of like a mantra that more plant species means more bees, and I've actually found the opposite. Like, and
Yeah.
I'm very surprised. Did I stuff up my cover? Yeah, I don't know, was I tired? Did I injuries wrong? But no, I definitely, like, I went through and I found that's definitely the case. And as I said, when I looked at the data more closely, it was because when there's more plant species in urban areas, most of those extra plants are exotic plants. And when you've got, in a fixed area, when you've got more plants, it means there's fewer flowers of the native plants. They make up a smaller proportion of the plants available. And so it did make sense. But that was very interesting. And I also made a couple of like discoveries of novel bee behaviors, and these are things that I think, like, lots of the cool scientific discoveries, people set out to study something and then they find something else out along the way. And so I recorded the first nesting behavior of this bee called Megachili igniter at the time. It's now been reclassified into its own genus. So it's the only species
Cool.
in this genus, Rosinapis. And so Rosinapis igniter, I found that using my bee hotels, I found these nests, and they were like, they had Banksia fuzz in them. I was like, what what the hell? Like, why are there Banksia fuzz in them? And then I found that every single nest of this species had Banksia fuzz in it. And what's even more unusual is that this species, it doesn't forage on Banksia. It's actually a specialist on native Fabaceae, so it's plants like Jacksonia. And so it's collecting this Banksia fuzz, putting it in its nest. We don't really know why. It must have like some adaptive benefit, or in the past did, at least, because why else would you go to the effort of doing this? But it also shows how important it is to consider both foraging and nesting requirements to
Yeah.
conserve the species. So that was really interesting, and something that had been never found before. So that was really cool. And then another, this wasn't so much part of my PhD research, but I during the period I was doing my PhD, I went to study my favorite bee species, Amegilla dawsoni, which is one of Australia's largest bees, and it has like really cool mating behaviours where they've got like two male forms. One is big, the major males, and the minor males. The major males fight with each other to mate with females when they first emerge from their nesting holes. And then the minor males, they can't win battles, so they sort of sneak off to the flowers and hope to find a female who escapes being mated at the mating grounds and is foraging on the flowers. And we were making recordings of their mating behavior, and I found that sometimes they can mate for over 10 minutes, which is quite a long time for bees. So that was
Wow.
yeah.
That's really cool and really weird. But yes, just the way that they act, the hierarchy that they've got set up there. That's very neat. I don't expect that there would be those kind of behaviors in insects, but that's very cool.
Yeah, it's they they were one of the, I guess, the first native bees I sort of became aware of, because these, when they've got these two different male forms with a different like mating tactics, it's called like alternative mating tactics. And
Yeah.
I learned about it in I think like third year zoology at UWA, and so that was my sort of introduction to native bees, bee sex. It got me
Good
into
way
it.
in. That's cool. Yeah, that is a lot of very awesome stuff that you would have learned just by being out on the field.
Yes.
So, yeah, with the nesting habits, is nesting something that bees tend to do?
So every female native bee needs to make a nest. Every female in the native bees, except for the eusocial Meliponini, they can all reproduce. So it's unlike the honeybees. So they will need to nest. Some of them dig their own nests in the ground. Some of them chew their own nests out in wood. And then the other ones, they rely on little holes in wood that are already there, created by wood-boring beetles. Or you can create your own holes in bee hotels.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, didn't think about it that way before. That's very interesting.
There's just so much yet to be discovered about native bees, and one of the critical gaps in knowledge is the taxonomy. So we actually don't know how many species of native bees we have in Australia. And
Oh,
I've done my surveys about it's usually about a fifth of the species I can't ID out because there's no keys. And so there's these things called taxonomic keys, and like you key out a
yeah.
species and they can't be keyed out. And so there's at the moment there's a bit over 1,500 species of bees that are just scientifically described, but there are so
Hmm.
many species in museums that they aren't scientifically described. And to you describe something, it doesn't have a scientific name. It can't really be conserved. We can't say that, this is how many species there are. It's like this big knowledge gap, and so there's a lot of work to be done, and we know so much about honeybees, and there's the native bees are really lagging behind, so they definitely need
Yeah,
attention.
they do. But that's fascinating. So when a species, or when you can't classify them, like how are they recorded or documented then if you can't give them a name and you can't give them a family or a genus?
I can ID them to genus, um,
Yeah,
but um, almost all the genera are described, and so I can ID it to genus, which is actually very
yeah.
tricky. Like features are like you can't just look at a photo. Well, I can, but most people can't. But so I've looked at like thousands of bees, and I now have like a sort of gestalt of what Amegilla versus Leoproctus versus Homolictus versus
Yeah,
Euhasma. Um, but so I can ID it to genus, and then if I look through keys, look through descriptions, look through museum databases, and I can't find a match, then I will give it a placeholder name. And every single one of my species that I collect as well, I give them a unique project number, like project code, and then a number. So every specimen has a project code and a number. And then I can go back to that. And hopefully in the future, like when there's been taxonomic revisions, or if someone is doing a revision, they can use my data as well to understand the species, the variation, or where they're distributed. So they've all got, yeah, science is a lot about a lot of details and data, and the minuscule. So, yeah.
that's crazy. Yeah, it's fascinating because if they haven't been given that official name, then no one else knows that they can look into them, that they can be
Mm,
researched, that they can be studied, and that's, yeah, that's crazy. So there's a lot of species that kind of do fall through the gaps.
yes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's nuts. Is might be out of scope. Is there something that is across the board? Like, are there a lot of these sorts of species of insects and animals which have just been given assigned a number, but not much else attributed to them?
Yeah, especially with insects. You know, there's just a bewildering diversity out there, and um, yeah, it's crazy, I guess, how much we don't know about them. Australia is it's a mega biodiverse country, and we know the birds and mammals quite well, reptiles and amphibians also quite well, but the insects are really lagging behind.
Yeah, yeah, and they contribute such a lot to the biodiversity too, and we
Mm,
know so little about them.
yes.
Ah, that's crazy. All this potential area to be explored. Not enough time to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how many of these numbered and identified species do you have that still need to have their own little thing attributed to them?
Probably about over 50 by now, I think.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's
That's
heaps.
that's just only a small
Oof,
fraction. I bet there's probably about 1,000 species in Australia that are still undescribed.
that's insane, but very, very cool. So, in terms of, okay, just because it's not my space, so now very, very curious. If they're all not described, how do other researchers know how to find ones which have been previously partially described by others?
Um, they they can't. The like if it's described, you know, what needs to happen is they need to be databased and put into a museum, and then if someone's doing a revision of a genus, they will then go to all the museums and get loans of the specimens in that genus or subgenus. And then, because like the code name I give an undescribed species, if it occurs in other places and someone else collects it, or even the same place and someone else collects it, they might give it a different code name. So you need to look at the
Yeah, exactly.
same species. So yeah, museums are really, really valuable, and they're also, I guess, like underappreciated. And
Absolutely.
yeah, natural history collections are invaluable. And yeah, some people, it's really weird. They get funny about like scientists like me collecting species. So to describe a species and to record it, you have to collect a specimen and then euthanize it. And it's
Mm.
my least favorite part of the job, the knowledge that
Yeah.
I'm, I guess killing bees, but at
Yeah.
the same time, I'm saving bees because if I didn't do that, we would not know that species occurs, or it's an undescribed species, or where they occur, or this place is very important habitat for this particular taxon, and yeah, it's a necessary evil of the job, and
Yeah.
in people, it's actually like the losses from you know a day of scientific collection are nothing compared to the losses that someone would cause through eating meat every day, for example. So it's you need to look at the big picture.
Yeah. And, you can preserve the information through data and images and stuff like that. But, having the actual specimen provides, more detail that you would lack otherwise,
Mm,
especially if you don't know what somebody will be needing to look at in the future from the data that you've collected.
yeah, yeah. So like yeah, science is it's not an individual endeavor. Like you're contributing to
Yeah.
this amazing big body of knowledge that everyone benefits from.
So all your specimens are carefully curated somewhere in natural history.
Yeah, at the moment, they're all in my collections, and I'm starting to put them into the WA Museum so that they can be then available. And yeah, there's just to me, this is like one of the most important parts of my research, but there's no funding to do databasing, and it's boring, and it
Yeah.
yeah, people just don't realize that that's that's the
That's a big part of
important
the.
part. Um,
Yeah.
more important than I guess like just writing a paper about the findings. Like that's really important. But these specimens, they're invaluable, and there's just no funding for that sort of stuff. There's like funding for field work or equipment, but this is actually a really important part that gets overlooked.
Yeah. Well, all the other stuff has more immediate results and more immediate, relatively speaking. But, all the stuff to do with the databasing and the curation, that is groundwork for future science that hasn't been started yet.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important. That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. Just the scope of that is just incredible. I love it. Very awesome. Cool. Okay. Well, I might move on to some of those other questions that I told you about. So, what hobby or interest you have that is most unrelated to your field of work?
Probably gymnastics and circus, so sort of
Ooh,
acrobatics. Yeah.
that's cool.
I
So,
I love performing, as I said, and
yeah,
I love the the thrill of being able to do some like sort of cool tricks, and I also have like naturally good flexibility, and I'm small, so it all sort of
works out.
works out.
That's cool. So, how do you get that out of your system?
So I did gymnastics as a child and I loved it. And then my parents made me quit when I was a teenager, and I sort of like never forgive them for that. And then when I got older, I there's not many adults gymnastics, but I found one,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's a lot of fun. But then there wasn't that performance aspect. And one of
Mm,
my good friends is a circus performer, and so she started up a little amateur circus group, and I was
nice.
in that, and I got to perform in Fringe Festival, and that was really fun. And
That's so cool.
now that I moved, I need to find a new circus or gymnastics place. So um,
Yeah, that's cool.
yeah, I still stretch every day, like do the splits every day, and I try and go for a jog to the park, and then do some like handstands and cartwheels, and like it's just playing. I think that's what I really love about circus and gymnastics. Like you're playing, and you get to have fun and get in touch with that like childish part. But then you can sort of do it as well, more like adult, like sort of burlesque style. So
Yeah,
there's so much that you can do with it.
there are a lot of opportunities for that. I mean, silks is nice and flashy, but opportunities for performances for that are a bit more limited. Have you been to Spun Out?
No, I haven't. It's it's really hard, I guess, when I've got field work.
Yeah,
It often like coincides with those sort of things. So I haven't, but
I
it's
know.
something I've been like wanting to go to sometime.
Yeah, it's cool. A few of my friends go there every year, and it sounds like it's such a great environment, such a great space to do all sorts of really cool things.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very, very cool. Okay, and which childhood book holds the strongest memories for you?
Ooh, okay. I was like a book nerd. I loved books. I loved reading. Um, Unfortunately, since I sort of got into since uni, I've just had so much like work reading that I had to do like, enjoyment reading. But
Yep.
so I loved Del Toro Quest by Emily
Ooh,
Rodda. So I despite being like
Amegilla is good.
a scientist, I love fantasy and sci-fi. And so
Yeah,
this was a really fantasy one. There were all these magical creatures. There was a quest. So I really loved that book. Yes.
that's cool. Yeah, it's hard when you get older and, even if you love, like, I love reading heaps when I was a kid, and then at uni, all the necessary reading, and I guess as an academic, all the research reading
Mm.
kind of really eats into that.
Yes.
That's cool. Emily Rodda's really awesome. I do love Emily Rodda. Was she Australian? I've forgotten.
I can't remember now, but she's prolific. She
Yeah, she
writes
was.
many books. Yeah.
And TV series. Yeah, very cool. Okay, and last one. What advice would you give someone who'd like to do what you do, or what advice should they ignore?
I would say that follow your passions, definitely. Do something that is meaningful to you, that you get some sort of meaning and enjoyment out of. Don't do something just because it's a flashy job or it brings in a lot of money. Do something that you enjoy, because it becomes part of your life, especially if you're doing PhD studies. And the other thing I would say is don't don't forget who you are. Um, Embrace like what makes you unique and make it sort of part of your job as well. You don't have to conform to a particular model of what a scientist should act or look like. Um, yeah, it's like make sure that you still have that part of your life that makes you you, rather than your career overrunning who you are.
Yeah, that is important because sometimes you just get so deep into it, you kind of lose sight of the reasons why you got there to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Excellent advice. Okay, so well, thank you so much, Kit, for speaking with me today. It has been so amazing learning about your research, getting to understand a lot more about native bees, and also, I guess the whole idea of taxonomy and the way that works in science, like that blows my mind, and I'm going to start looking into that a bit more.
Awesome. Well, I think if that's the case, then I've got across what I want. So,
That's cool. If you would like to find out more about what you do, where can they learn more?
so I have a Facebook group called Bees and the Burbs. I also have a book called Creating a Haven for Native Bees, which has information on what are the best plants for bees, how to make bee hotels that work, and about the biology and ecology of our native bees. Then I also have a little guide about bee taxonomy called A Crash Course in Native Bee Taxonomy. And
Nice.
then I also have a book on Amegilla dawsoni, and this is more of a, so the other ones are like information-based ones. This one has info about Amegilla dawsoni, but it's a narrative. It was about my like journey to find it and all these like weird, wonderful adventures that I went on. So those are my books
Yeah.
that people can get by emailing me at kitprendergast21@gmail.com.
Yep.
And then my research, so the publications, I have a ResearchGate profile. So if you just type in ResearchGate Kit Prendergast, you'll find my page with all my publications. And if you can't just download them from there, you can send me like a request through ResearchGate, and I'll send you the scientific article for free.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, it's been so wonderful to speak to you today. And yeah, really enjoyed it. And I hope you have an amazing day and enjoy doing your research up in Southwest and well, up north as well. And yeah, it's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I really enjoy hearing Kit speak about her passion for native bees and learning how much there is yet to learn about them. It was also fascinating to hear about taxonomy and identification in biology, the gaps in our knowledge, and the scope of the work that can and needs to be done in this space. To learn more about Kit and what we discuss on the show, or to connect with us, please visit the Steam Powered website at steampoweredshow.com. You can also find out more about Kit and her work on her Facebook group, Bees and the Burbs, and through her published works, the links for which will be in the show notes. If you enjoyed this conversation, please let me know. Subscribe to this channel, leave a comment below, and share this with your geeky and geek curious friends. You can also support Steam Powered on Patreon and Ko-fi under Steam Powered Show, the links for which will also be in the show notes. Thanks for watching!